Hello, beautiful Learn to Love listeners. If you want to support the show, support me, and learn some valuable insight on how to love this world with a wide open heart, definitely check out my book, Love and Suffering, a Spiritual Guide for Helpers, Healers, and Humans. Coming out September 1st, it's available for pre-order now on Amazon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and for today's episode, we have the incredible Dr. Bonnie Comfort. Dr. Bonnie Comfort has been a practicing psychologist for over 30 years. She has her master's in social work from the University of Manitoba and a PhD in psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, Los Angeles. Her novel Denial, a psychological thriller from Simon Schuster, was published in 8 countries and translated into 5 languages. An expert on marital therapy, she came onto the show to talk about her newest book, Staying Married is the Hardest Part. In this memoir, she pulls back the curtain on what really keeps relationships together, challenges outdated ideals of marriage, and exposes the unspoken truths about sex, power, and emotional survival. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Bonnie. Welcome to the Learn to Love podcast. How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm interested in what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm super excited that you are here too. I'm super excited to hear both about your professional life as a therapist and your personal life of living with a long-term relationship, because that's basically our topic for today, about the ebb and flow of long-term love. And I first just want to ask you if you think that this is still the goal in life. If happily ever after is a fairy tale that we should leave to the fiction category of books, or if we should still seek that lifelong partnership and that person to share the rest of our life with.
Well, I do think it's a fantasy that we're going to live happily ever after, and certainly live ever after. But I do think people are pack animals, and that we are usually at our happiest when we are close to somebody, a partner, a lover, a friend, and that person witnesses our life over time. Whether we can sustain a marriage or a love relationship for 3 or 4 decades depends on the quality of the relationship and the age at which we started. 50% of people in this country get divorced. So that tells us the expectation that we're going to live happily ever after is to some extent an unrealistic one. But that being said, I think it's possible to have a marriage or a partnership of 30 or 40 years if your expectations are more in line with what's likely to happen.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people do use that statistic that 50, 60% of marriages fail as evidence that it's a failed institution. Like none of us would buy a new car if we knew it was going to explode in the next year. Like a 50% failure rate's not the best, but what's your take?
Well, I think part of it is that our expectations of what marriage should do for us has gone up and up and up. And, in previous generations and certainly previous centuries, people didn't expect marriage to make them happy. It was to some extent a family requirement, and in many parts of the world it still is a financial arrangement. It's a way to have children, all of that. But now, certainly in Western culture and modern day, we're expecting a partner to make us happy. And if we're not happy in that relationship, we're not able to think of it as worthwhile anymore. So I think, divorce is so easy. It no longer has any shame attached to it. If you're not happy, walk away. But it's costly if you have children. It's costly if your finances are very badly damaged by divorce. And so the phase of your life when you marry has everything to do with, I think, how long you can sustain a good relationship. I mean, I think, people who get married in their early 20s, by the time you're 40, you're a different person. And maybe the relationship doesn't fit anymore with who you are now. So I don't think it's a failure if you've been together for 15 or 20 years and you think, no, this isn't working for us anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting how you said earlier that people are pack animals, like we are social beings.
Yeah.
And along with the expectations of marriage going up and up and up, we've had less community and social connection over time, and more pressure is being put on your singular romantic, intimate relationship to fulfill those needs that a village used to fulfill.
Exactly. And I think it's unrealistic and it's unfair to each other to expect that.
Now, I've heard you mention a few times it matters the phase of life that you kind of meet each other. So what phase of life should we be making those lifelong commitments?
Well, I think the ideal time is around the age of 30, 29 to 33, something like that. Because you've had some long-term relationships already, probably and dating experiences. 1 and 2, you have a much better sense of who you are by 30 than you do at 20. And that makes a big difference in who you would choose. You've had 10 years of learning what you like and what you don't like in a partner. And I think it really increases the likelihood that you're going to choose more wisely. And I think, if a couple wants children, then you can't wait too much longer than that to get married and have a child. If you don't want a child, you can wait longer and it's fine. But there seems to be like that range of age 20 to 35 or 40 where you're adaptable, where you're more willing to compromise, adjust to yourself, grow together with a partner. If you meet somebody get married or have a long-term relationship for the first time when you're 45 or 50, you're already so set in your ways and who you are. I think you either have to, it's just harder to adjust to somebody else and get used to somebody else's habits and all that. You're just more malleable when you're, in your late 20s, early 30s.
So it's a little bit of a sweet spot I'm hearing from you, because we do want some time to know who we are, what we like, what we value, to make sure we're with somebody with those same values, but not too set in our ways, not too much a creature of habit, because we are going to share a life with somebody.
Yes, exactly.
So you've been a practicing psychologist for almost 3 decades now, and you work with couples, right?
I work with couples and individuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the ebb and flow of long-term love. And let's say a married couple does come to you and things are pretty much on the rocks. Like they're going to separate and they're coming to you as a last-ditch effort to save the relationship. What's the first thing you do with them?
Well, actually, the first thing I do with them is I have a joint session with them together. And then I have one individual session with each of them where I can really get a read. Like, are you really done? Are you just doing this so that you feel like you've clicked the last box before you call the lawyer and go to divorce? And if somebody says, I'm really done, I'm in love with somebody else, I'm absolutely done, I don't want to be in this relationship, then, it's something that has to be discussed with the partner. But other than that, I think, people come because they have argued, they've gotten much less hopeful about the future. And their idea of coming for couples therapy is that in the therapy sessions, the therapist will see what needs to be done to fix their partner. and I'm here to enlist your help to fix my partner. And each person comes in that way.
Clearly, I'm not the problem.
Right.
Clearly, my partner is the source of all the problems in our relationship.
Yes. And if that partner were just changed, I'd be really happy. So I mean, the first order of business is me getting a reading on what their complaints are, but also I ask people in their first session, tell me why you fell in love with this person. What is it about it that drew you together? What's really good about your marriage, so that they have some opportunity to refocus on the whole picture and not just what's wrong. And it's very helpful. Sometimes, people leave feeling better about themselves. I didn't know you thought that, or, remembering the good times. And it's helpful. I think when a couple gets entrenched in their arguments and their power struggles, they lose perspective for what has been good about the relationship and what they do love about this person.
That's so interesting that during the individual session, you kind of check in, like, are you already out the door, but you
Yes.
haven't told the partner? Because you can tell me.
Yeah, right.
I think something that comes up for me when we talk about like the ebb and flow of long-term love is how one does differentiate or tell whether this is just a slump, this is just a temporary, state of dissatisfaction in the relationship, or if that's a sign that, you're too different, things are diverging too much, and this is the beginning of the process of separation. Like, is this a dry spell in the bedroom, or is this just simply the end? So how do we kind of differentiate between the general ups and downs that happen in all relationships, between things are down, we're going to stay down, and there's no going up?
Really good question. I mean, part of it is, how long has it been this way? How long have you been feeling alienated, not seen and understood, disconnected, lonely in this relationship? How long has that been going on? The second question is, what have you done to try to fix it? And what have the roadblocks been to that? And the third thing I want to know is, what do you think you are doing that's contributing to the distance? So that's what I would do to try to figure it out. But your question is, how do you know whether there's no going back, whether it's not just a phase, whether this is all that there is that's left that can be, and when is it time to leave? And that's different from a dry spell. That I think that there are criteria for leaving that are glaring. For example, if there's physical or emotional abuse in the relationship, that kind of goes without saying. And if a partner refuses to accept any responsibility for what's gone on between you, is shut down, is angry, is digging in their heels, and will not kind of come to the bargaining table. And then I think substance use, chronic substance use, is a big problem. I mean, if somebody's married to a person who's so checked out because they're drunk or, stoned all the time, that gets to be an ultimatum moment, where if you don't take care of this, I can't stay with you anymore.
What I'm hearing from you is there are some definite deal breakers. So physical, emotional abuse, substance abuse. I'm also hearing another deal breaker is one partner's blatant refusal to look at themselves, to reflect on their own role in the relationship.
Right.
But beyond that, a lot of things can be repaired, can be fixed. And I'm also hearing like good advice, like couples therapy 101 for any clinicians listening, is those 3 questions. How long has it been this way? What have you tried? And what are you doing that's contributing to the issue? So earlier I heard you use the term power struggle, and I'm curious more about that. Like, what role does power play in our relationships?
I think there is a power dynamic in every relationship. And there are factors that go into it. But one of the kind of more subtle factors that I think is interesting is the person who wants the relationship more has less power. The person who cares less about maintaining the relationship or keeping it at any cost tends to be less flexible, less accommodating, and so there's that dynamic. But in every relationship, there's power imbalances, and they change over time, depending on how each individual feels they're doing in their own life, whether they feel proud of themselves or ashamed of themselves in some way. It all kind of plays out in your primary relationship.
That's such a key insight, that the person who wants the relationship more has less power.
Yes.
And they'll probably end up giving up more of themselves in order
Yes.
to maintain the relationship, sacrificing parts of themselves.
Exactly. Accommodating too much.
I feel like a common question that arises with long-term love is like how to keep the spark alive. And I know you've studied the science of relationships, and I almost feel like there's two approaches, the distance approach and the closeness approach. Like some say, oh, when you have emotional intimacy, that will lead to sexual romantic intimacy. While others, like Esther Perel, say, actually, it's distance that creates desire. It's mystery. You don't want to know your partner too much, you know? I'm curious your thoughts on this.
That is so interesting. They're polarized way of thinking about it. And I think it depends on it depends on the difference in the personality construction of two partners. As often in a relationship, there's a partner who will care more about being suffocated or overwhelmed, and in response will withdraw. And that person wants a very firm boundary. They don't want to feel smothered by the person they're with. They don't want to feel too close. And then there's a person who, it's kind of like that attachment theory, that Julie Manano talks about, where one person is an anxious, obsessive attacher, and the other one, pulls back and withdraws and is avoidant. But I think avoidant people find novelty and mystery more sexually appealing, and people who are more clingy and anxious find the closeness and nurturing more sexually appealing. So it's and when you have a couple where there's one of each, it's I'm thinking it's more like, well, I don't know which one could have an affair. Both of them could have an affair, but I think it depends on your personality style, which you find more appealing. I don't think it's one idea fits all. I mean, I'm more of the emotional closeness variety. So I feel most sexually free and engaged with somebody I feel safe with, who I feel very loved by, who feels really close to me and understands me. That to me is what turns me on. But I know there are many other people where it's the opposite. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be seen that way. I want to be seen as sexy, and I want to be mysterious. Yeah. So I'm guessing you mentioned Esther Perel and John Gottman. I'm guessing that Esther Perel is more like I want mystery and distance, and Gottman wants, I want to be totally together with my partner.
Right.
And he does all of his seminars together with his wife, and he did with his previous wife too. So
I love your key insight. I'm hearing the personality piece, and yes, like sometimes when I do see the Gottmans like together, I'm like, man, working with my partner, that's just too close. That's too much time. But it's for me, it is. But for other people, it's like a dream, spending all day, every day with their partner.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I like you also looking at it through the realm of attachment theory, because yes, to an anxious person, they want to feel safe and secure in order to move on before they move on in any other way.
And the other one feels like, I don't want to feel invaded. I don't want to feel smothered. So they're really attracted to somebody where there's mystery and distance, because that makes them feel safe emotionally.
So any opinions on being too close, when people get too comfortable with each other and share the bathroom a little bit too much? Like, does that dampen the spark?
I think it depends on the people. I really do. I think Some people feel totally fine about sharing bathroom functions and it doesn't turn them off and it doesn't make them feel distant or, oh, there's no mystery left in this. Other people are like, oh, God, close the door. And it's individual. I don't think there's a rule that applies to everybody. It's so much like that. But I think one of the appeals about mystery and more distant is you get to see yourself anew in somebody else's eyes. And that feels exciting. A mysterious stranger who doesn't know you and thinks you're fabulous and is attracted to you feels very exciting in a way that somebody who, sees you sitting on the toilet doesn't.
Yeah, I was thinking what a romantic statement that you said, that you get to see yourself anew in somebody else's eyes.
Yes.
That was in my head, and then you mentioned being on the toilet, and I was like, I don't think it applies, but but I do think that's such a boon of relationships when we do find somebody that loves us and they see the good in us, and that allows us to see the good in us too.
Yeah,
it'd be great if we could love ourselves fully first before loving somebody, but so often through somebody else's love, we learn of our own lovability. Right. So when we talk about the ebb and flow of long-term love, I am wondering if you do find there are natural rhythms that relationships do go through. In general, most human beings do follow the general life cycle. You mentioned, getting married at 30, having some kids. During kids, relationship sexual satisfaction goes down.
Right.
But of course, there's aging that affects all areas of our romantic relationships. But is there a general wave that we find couples learning to surf?
I think so. And I also think that if you feel secure in your relationship, you can distance yourself because you're, for example, you're heavily invested in some kind of work project that may go on for a year or two even. But if you feel that the relationship is there, that you can put it a little more on the back burner, that your partner will understand, it's okay. It does mean more distance, though. And whether it's really difficult for the partner if one is totally preoccupied with outside endeavors depends on what the other partner has to do for the couple or family in the absence of the one who's so involved in something else. So I mean, I've seen wives who are quite upset because they wind up having to do so much of the childcare and domestic labor because their partner, male or female, is heavily invested in a career, and then the person who's the caretaker at home feels unrecognized and gets no relief and feels more unappreciated and isn't getting as much satisfaction out of it as somebody whose career is going really well and has getting accolades for it and getting money for it, while the person at home is not. So that kind of thing can create distance between people for a while, and then some circumstances change. I think we have to expect those phases in our relationships where we're closer and farther apart depending on the external events impacting each of us.
I want to go back to something you said towards the very beginning, which is that back in the day, people did not expect their marriage essentially to make them happy. But now we do have this expectation, and with expectations comes disappointment when we aren't happy all the time, 100%. So what are some more reasonable expectations we should have going into lifelong partnership?
Well, I think we have to focus more on what, as an individual, what makes you happy. Not what can I get my partner to do that'll make me happy, but what can I do to create, in the context of my relationship, what can I do to create happiness for myself? What can I do that feeds my self-esteem, that isn't dependent on my partner, regardless of what it is, whether it's work or it's play or it's being a good parent, or, having a career that you like, or an artistic endeavor, anything that feeds your self-esteem and makes you feel good and you seek joy from it, that doesn't have to be dependent on your partner. To me, that helps so much take pressure off the relationship. And I also think we have to take pressure off a marital relationship by getting a lot of love with other people, just platonic friendships. I love live plays and live music. My partner can't stand it. I want to go with my girlfriends to see those things.
The true story.
Well, it's kind of true with both of my partners. Yeah, my husband, who died 15 years ago, when I was with him for 33 years, he hated to go to plays. He couldn't stand it. Something about feeling confined or whatever. So I love, live plays. So I, go with friends. But that kind of thing. Or, I don't really ever want to see a tractor pull again. but he loved them. So being able to, have other friends to do things with when the partner doesn't like them is very important.
I really resonate with that idea. The more we can meet our own needs with other people on our own, it frees up the relationship to be what it is. It relieves the pressure of the other partner to have to meet all these needs. And then they can meet the needs that are offered freely.
Yeah.
And when you did say focus more on what makes you happy, I was even thinking, doing things for my partner makes me happy. Like, actually, we can also shift maybe I can shift from thinking I need my partner to make me happy to what can I do to make my partner happy?
And if both people feel that way, it's wonderful, really wonderful, thoughtful, but no two people are identical. There's not going to be overlap in every single area. So, if there's enough overlap, you really feel seen and loved, you can still go hiking with somebody else rather than your partner, if that's what you love to do, or downhill skiing or whatever.
So let's move on to your memoir. Staying Married is the Hardest Part. So I'm super glad to have you on the show, and I'm curious your intention behind a memoir, simply because, many of the therapists turned authors we've had on the show have all their best tips and advice for love and long-term relationships. But you really integrated your own life into the wisdom. So what made you want to write a memoir as opposed to a how-to?
Well, there's thousands of how-tos out there, first of all. And the reason I wrote a memoir was, first of all, because I was very grief-stricken over losing my husband. And we'd been together for 33 years. He developed a rare form of dementia, which is faster than Alzheimer's. He was 8 years from diagnosis to death. And what didn't work in our relationship kind of melted away, and we were very close and very loving with each other up until the end. And I was so heartbroken to lose him that I needed to write. I mean, I was a writer already. I had a previous novel that had done really well, and I had written a second novel. And so I turned to writing to try to heal myself. And that's why I was writing about the truth. And I started out writing my grief, but it morphed into writing about my anger as well, about the aspects of my marriage that were not good for me. And I needed to process that and make my peace with it and let go of my anger toward my husband over those things. And so it was therapy for me, I guess is the short answer.
I'm curious how it does feel putting such details about your life out there into the world. Like,
it's nerve-wracking. It's definitely nerve-wracking because, I've had some family members say, well, why do you need to talk about that? I've had people say to me, well, how do you think your patients are going to feel when they find out about that? But I think it's important for people to know that even a psychologist who's very well educated about relationships, is a flawed human being like the rest of us and has things go wrong in the relationship. And so I think it's good to have a more realistic view of therapists. And I also think I learned a lot in the process of writing about the troubles in my own marriage, and I thought it was valuable for other people to hear it. So I'm sort of prepared to put up with some negative responses to why I would be so self-revealing. I had an interview with another podcaster who started out by saying, "Well, I read your book and your smutty book," and I thought,
Wow.
I said, I never would say it was smutty. I was so taken aback, but I get, some people, I guess, might say that. I didn't think it.
I would not use that word either.
Well, I mean, people have sexual problems of all varieties, and it's, I think it's good to be able to air it out and talk about it rather than having it all be so secretive.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, that it's so much about our personal lives we don't share with others. Right. We see the Facebook photos of the couple and they're so happy and somehow they're always on vacation and then and then they get divorced and we're like, well, I thought you guys were so happy, but you learn, of course, they don't share their own issues.
Even with lots of friendships, people don't ask about that. I do. That's because who I am and I want to know. So with my close girlfriends, I always ask them, so how are things sexually between you and your partner? But if I didn't ask, I would never know because they don't volunteer it. Very few do.
Because you do go, yes, very much into intimate details about your life. And one example is that you mentioned in the book that at one point your husband told you to have discreet affairs with other people and not to tell him. So I have many questions about this.
Okay.
But I just want to say your story is something I hear from so many couples who say want to open their relationship in some way, is they come to the agreement. A week goes by. You did what? Facing the reality of it. Yeah. Because I read that, and actually your husband was not happy to hear about what you had done. So let's start from the beginning. For example, what was going wrong in the relationship that led to this relationship agreement?
Well, my husband and I were very sexual with each other in the first few years we were married. But he is he was in show business. He was a television and movie writer. And, show business can break your heart if you're a writer. And this is kind of what was happening to him. He would write these beautiful pieces and the network would say, we don't want that, can't air it. Why don't you do this show that has a lot of car chases and violence in it? And so he was frustrated and angry, and he poured his heart into writing a script, and then it would either get made as a pilot and then never picked up to be a TV series. What he did in response was get depressed, and he shut down sexually, and he just couldn't even think about sex. He was just, he was just bummed out. I'd find him in the living room, 2:00 in the morning, listening to Beethoven and, tears streaming down his face. But I was frustrated with him because I really wanted him to be able to bring himself to me, even though he was upset and he couldn't. And so this went on. We started fighting about it because I would ask, I'd wait a month and say, okay, but not about what now? And I can't just do it now, he would say. And finally, he just started saying to me, look, I can't, I'm doing my best. I can't do it. Just go out and find it somewhere else and don't tell me about it. And don't do it with any of my friends. And
one rule.
As a therapist, I was outraged. I said, that is not going to work. That's not going to fix our relationship. That's not a solution. But he kept saying it, and he kept not being able to bring himself to me sexually. And so I got angry, and I thought, fine, okay, if that's what you want, that's what I'll do. I didn't say that to him. But in my heart, I was angry, and I did it out of anger. It wasn't that I was looking for somebody else. It wasn't that I wanted to fall in love with anybody else, and I didn't. I just wanted to, I guess, affirm that I was attractive still, and I wanted the playfulness of it and the naughtiness of sneaking around and all that. But I was indiscriminate in who I chose because I wasn't looking for somebody else. I was always in love with him. So that went on for quite a long time.
How long
And
is a long time?
5 years.
Oh, wow. That is a very
Long
long time.
I had one relationship that, an affair that lasted for about a year. And then I had another one that was for a year. So, it was intermittent. It wasn't continuous, but it was over a 5-year span. And then one day he came home and said to me, "So did you ever fool around?" And
5 years later, he
said,
checks in on how things are
I
going.
don't know. To this day, I don't know what prompted him to ask it at that time. I have no idea. And I should have asked. I never did. And now I'll never know. But I said, "Well, I don't want to talk to you about it." And he said, "Oh, well, then you have. So tell me about it." And then he said to me, "I won't be angry. I told you to do it. I won't be angry. I promise you. I promise you I won't be angry because I told you to do it." So I believed him stupidly. and I didn't realize until after he died and I sort of thought about the whole thing. Of course he was angry. Of course he was hurt. Maybe, of course he hoped, I guess, that I would not have really done it. And he used to say to me in, his last few years, he said, "I think if you hadn't done that, you would have left me." And he didn't want me to leave him. And that's why he suggested it. But, as I wrote in my memoir, it was like thinking of me like a car who could just pull into any gas station and get filled up and then come home. It was such an erroneous way of thinking about it for me, particularly.
In other words, that's how you rationalized it, or that's how it just felt like a mechanical thing that you did to get amusement?
I didn't rationalize doing it. I felt justified in doing it because he basically checked out and, couldn't be my sex partner for way too long. And because he told me to do it, I felt that I had permission. But I didn't feel good about it. I mean, I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. And it wasn't satisfying to me emotionally. What I really wanted was him. But once I told him about it, things deteriorated between us because his way of handling it was, "Oh, this really turns me on. Now I want to see you with somebody else. Call that guy, that last guy that you were with, and let me see you do it with him." And I said, "No, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that." And so then he started pressuring me to expose myself to men in public because that excited him. And I sometimes I did it to some extent, and sometimes I got angry with him and said no, and then we'd fight, and it was bad. They were, we were at those moments, if I said a firm no and he was angry about it, we would shut down and there'd be distance between us until it just kind of burned out and then we were close again.
Well, I have so many more questions, but obviously that's what the memoir is for, to learn all the more details.
Yeah.
But let's go into the resolution. I'm hearing the fighting, I'm hearing the disconnection, I'm hearing the depression that lasts for a very long time. And it is really important to recognize that so many mental health issues absolutely kill one's libido.
Yeah.
And often, as much as we want to, as partners, we can't, quote unquote, shake them out. Like we can't fix them or cure their mental illness. There are things we can do to help, obviously. But how did things resolve themselves?
Well, at that time, when I told him everything, he said to me, "Okay, I don't want you to do it anymore. I want to be your lover, and I'm going to do my best." And he did. He got better. And I never cheated on him again. And we were together, for another 20 years. And we had a lot of rebonding, I would say, because his form of foreplay was having me dress up in lingerie or pretty clothes and him take photographs of me, just the two of us. And I was fine with that. So most of the time I did that, and that would turn him on, and we would, play, and it would be good. And then, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years after all that, after I told him about it and we kind of reunited, he developed a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a kind of cancer that in his case was curable. And so we went through a year together of horrible chemotherapy and radiation, and I just knocked myself out to do everything I could for him to get through it and make him feel comfortable and make sure that, his medical care was as good as it could be. And up until that time, I had still had in my head, well, if this doesn't get any better, I'm going to leave. And after that, I knew I would never leave him, that I loved him way too much to leave him ever. And he was profoundly grateful to me for how I had looked after him. And there was a power differential between us until that point. And after that, I felt that we really were equals, that he recognized my competence. He recognized my devotion to him. He wanted to be more flexible in finding compromises for things. And our marriage was much, much better.
Well, I'm definitely hearing a message of hope that many relationships can be repaired. Even after years of infidelity, a relationship can still be repaired. That people can stay together. Just hearing 20 years after that, you stayed together for. I'm also hearing, it almost seemed like a huge catalyst was his desire to be better, his commitment to be better, to improve, to take care of himself. So I'm also hearing that a key part of being in a long-term relationship is committing to improving the relationship, not becoming complacent, but also going through one's own emotional growth.
Yes, and he did go to therapy finally. He'd been in therapy that was not really focused on our relationship, but after that, he went into long-term therapy to self-examine and to understand himself better and to understand why he'd pressured me so much. And our capacity to talk about our inner life was a key factor in what allowed us to stay together. And that's not always the case with a couple. People vary in their capacity to know their feelings and to have words for their feelings. And both of us, fortunately, were good at that. And we had dialogue with each other about it. And to me, that is a very hopeful way of fixing a relationship, because if you don't want to know what you feel and you don't know how to say it, it's harder to get what you need, and it's harder to have the partner know what to give you.
I love that. Know what you feel and know how to say it.
Yes, exactly.
Dr. Bonnie Comfort's advice for long-term love, author of Staying Married is the Hardest Part. Before we close, I do have to ask you the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
I want people to know that love is a combination of affection and respect for each other, desire for closeness, for patience, and empathy. And that those are key factors that allow love to endure over time. And finding forgiveness for your partner who's inevitably going to hurt you and piss you off about something.
Once a day.
Right.
Well, there's the recipe for love from the chef herself. Combination of affection, respect, desire for closeness, patience, empathy, and forgiveness. Dr. Bonnie Comfort, thank you so much for coming on to the show. For our listeners who want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Just go to my website, bonniecomfort.com. One word.
And are you still practicing or are you retired?
I don't take any new patients. I have a few left. I have a handful of people that I've seen for a long time, and that's all. I'm not seeing anybody for therapy anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I and all of our listeners and readers appreciate you putting down your wisdom and life story to something that we can all read and share. And thank you for sharing your intimate details, smutty details with the world. But thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, somebody else's words. Thank you for sharing your experience, both as a psychologist and as a perfectly imperfect human being like us all, making mistakes, learning along the way, and trying our best in this messy human love life.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I have to say, it's a pleasure to have a conversation with a man about love, because many of those conversations are with women.
Well, happy to represent.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
And thank you, listeners, so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Dr. Bonnie Comfort shared with us today, including the ideal time to marry is between the ages of 29 and 33. You want to know that sweet spot where you know who you are, you have some experience and some financial stability, but you are not too set in your ways. Some key questions to consider when dealing with a slump include: how long has it been this way? What have you done to try to fix it? And what do you think you are doing that's contributing to the distance? And remember, what builds intimacy is different for everyone. An avoidant person might find novelty and mystery more appealing, while an anxious person needs closeness and safety. In love, we get to see ourselves anew in somebody else's eyes. We are all human, and even a psychologist and expert in relationships is still flawed and makes mistakes. To communicate the best in relationships, know what you feel and know how to say it. And the secret recipe for love is a combination of affection, respect, desire for closeness, patience, empathy, and forgiveness. And remember, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.